this video, I'll be sharing a recipe that just might be in our top 5 household favorites between Ashley and I. This kale meatball pasta works both as a leveled up weeknight dinner, or it'd be a great pick for your next date night at home. And because the kale is the star of the show here, the beef meatballs we'll be making can be easily made with impossible meat to make this vegetarian or vegan, if that's you or your partner's preference. Besides kale, I'd like to call out one more ingredient, and that's pine nuts. Now, pine nuts can be on the little more expensive side, but they're crucial here, and there's no substitution in my opinion. These pine nuts are what elevate the dish. If you've never had toasted pine nuts in a salad or pasta like this before, you definitely gotta give these a try, as it's a singular flavor that I truly believe brings this dish together. We're going to start our prep by toasting these pine nuts in a non-stick pan. I like to start on low as they can be kind of delicate, and I've burned a lot of pine nuts before by throwing them in a ripping hot pan. And like I said, these aren't cheap, so let's make sure we don't lose a single pine nut here. After about 3 or 4 minutes on medium heat, you'll start to smell these get toasty, and that's your sign to pay close attention to the next few minutes to get these golden brown. Once we have some nice color on these, I'll put them in a bowl and set aside for later. Now let's make our meatballs. This is a very simple meatball recipe, unlike traditional Italian meatballs, which might have some fresh herbs and Parmesan cheese. We're gonna go with a basic onion, garlic, and breadcrumb combination so that they don't overpower the kale and the pasta. This is not a meaty dish. It's more like the meatballs are a side to everything else. First, let's dice up an onion and chop up some garlic. Since I haven't gone through how I dice these up, I figured it might be helpful to do so. If you're already confident with your knife skills, skip to this part of the video or find the timestamp in the description. So first I'm chopping the onion in half using the root as a guide. This is so that we can keep our two halves from falling apart. After that, I'm chopping off the stem side on both halves and peeling off the skin and the first layer of onion. This makes it easier to peel, and I often find the first layer to be a little tougher and discolored anyway. I'm then making vertical cuts from right to left, and the distance between cuts will determine how fine our dice is. We want finely diced onions here, so I'm making a bunch of cuts pretty close together, and then I'm making a horizontal cut starting at the front of the onion to help with our dice. My tip is to take your time here. All those impressive knife skills videos feature professionals who are tasked with preparing dozens of onions on a daily basis. We just have this one onion here, so we have a lot more time than those professionals. Use that to your benefit and cut at your own pace. And onions are cheap, so buy a big bag of them, and if you mess up, just try again. But this is a very important skill in the home kitchen. After our initial dice, it doesn't have to be perfect because we can go over it again and chop away to get our fine dice. Yes, a food processor can do this, but they're a hassle to clean and you have less control of your cuts. Control is key, especially for our chopped garlic. I've got 2 cloves here, to which I will first cut off the part that was attached to the root, then smash the garlic using the side of my knife. I'm basically using the palm of my hand and hitting the blade, carefully staying away from the sharp part. We're just using some force and the blade does the rest. And now I'll finally chop the garlic by rocking the knife up and down, slowly moving right to left. If you've got a sharp knife, the blade should do most of the work here. I'll then go over it a few more times, and what helps a lot here is to sprinkle on some coarse kosher salt and to smash the garlic even more with the side of the blade. This almost creates like a garlic paste, which I'll then chop even more. This technique ensures that we won't have big chunks of garlic in the meatballs, and it will be evenly distributed for maximum flavor. Now that our onions and garlic are chopped, I'll set aside and grab my wide mixing bowl where I'll throw in our beef. I've got about 1.5 pounds of 80/20 ground beef here. I'm gonna push down on it and kind of form a meatball within my bowl. I'll add 2 cups of our chopped onions here. Use less if you want this less oniony, but I love onions. I'll then add my chopped garlic, 2 whole eggs, and about a half of this box of panko breadcrumbs, about 2 cups. A few pinches of salt and cracked black pepper go in as well, and this is where we get our hands dirty. I do think this is where a lot of people get intimidated or uncomfortable by cooking. I know you might not like getting your hands dirty, or you might think you're doing something wrong, but making meatballs like this is basically like playing with Play-Doh. You really gotta get in there and work the mixture. The eggs will hydrate the panko and it will start forming into one cohesive mix within about 30 seconds. We can stop when it basically looks like one giant meatball. Now we'll start forming our meatballs by hand. The common golf ball size always works when trying to measure out in your hand. I do like meatballs on the bigger side, but that's my personal preference. Definitely make these meatballs your own. Whatever size you go with, just know that these will strengthen the pan a little bit as the fat renders out. I aim for about 14 to 16 meatballs, which we'll be able to easily distribute between our 4 to 5 servings of pasta. We'll now cover these with plastic wrap and place them in the fridge for at least 30 minutes to firm up in the cold air. That will give us time to prep our kale, where all I'm doing is removing the leaves from 2 whole bunches of kale. I know this seems like a lot of kale, but this will cook down a bunch in the pan, and I like having a lot just in case there are a few leaves that I don't like and I can throw out. You want the leaves to feel stiff, which means they're fresh. I'll then quickly wash these leaves in my salad spinner and set aside for cooking. If you are planning to make this for a date night or a special occasion, occasion, I do recommend making the meatballs and prepping the kale and pine nuts way in advance, as everything's gonna come together really quickly in cooking, and all of these things can be done early in the day. Okay, now it's time to cook our kale meatball pasta. I've got 2 pots heating on the stove. My Dutch oven is preheating on medium-high. I've got a saucepan heating up water to boil our pasta. I mentioned this in my kitchen essentials video, but I do like making pasta in a smaller saucepan like this. One, it can still fit a 1-pound box of pasta, and it doesn't need as much water, which means it'll come to boil quicker, and it'll give us a starchier and saltier pasta water, which is important for this dish. I'm going to use my pasta, which is orecchiette here, as my guide for timing. It's 9 minutes to al dente, which means as soon as the salted water reaches boiling, I'm going to sear my meatballs for a couple minutes and start my pasta, as I'll want to remove it just before al dente to finish in the pot with the kale and meatballs. So meatballs are going into my preheated Dutch oven with about a 1/4 cup of olive oil. And don't do what I did here initially, which is overcrowding the pan. I've made this dish a dozen times, I have no clue why I did that. But learn from my mistake and start with about a half of the meatballs if you're using a Dutch oven around this size. Our goal here is to sear the meatballs to get some good color, and also render a good amount of beef fat in the pan to flavor our kale. If onions start falling off the meatballs, that's not a problem, that's just more flavor for the cooking oil. After searing for a couple minutes, let's get our pasta started and give it an initial stir. Orecchiette especially has a tendency to clump up and stick to the pan. Stirring occasionally will assure that doesn't happen. Now that our pasta is going, I'm going to add our massive amount of kale to the pot with the meatballs. Again, this looks like too much kale and even looks like it's about to spill out. This is why I like using a Dutch oven here. The heavy lid will lock everything in, and this will now steam the kale and finish cooking our meatballs to about medium, almost medium rare. While that's going, I'm going to scoop out about a 1/2 cup of our pasta water, which I'll add to the kale and meatballs after a couple minutes. This will get more steam going and will season the kale. With a minute or so left for our pasta, I'll remove the lid on my Dutch oven to a huge cloud of steam, as the kale should be cooked down a bit, and I can start stirring the meatballs and kale together to make sure they're starting to get to know each other well. I'll then test my pasta by tasting it. It should be a tad undercooked, as it will finish in the pan, and I actually like orecchiette to be extra al dente, which will also be great for leftovers. Next, I'll add the pasta to the pot with a slot spoon, which will reserve the pasta water. I'll add about another 1/2 cup of pasta water here, and then turn off the heat, as it's already hot enough to finish this off. I'll give it a good mix and then add the toasted pine nuts. To finish it off, I'll add the juice of 1 whole lemon, and the acidity is important here to balance out this dish. I'll then taste it for seasoning, to which I'll usually add a tiny pinch of salt and a good amount of cracked pepper. Remember, the pasta water was well seasoned, so we don't have to go too far with any additional salt. And for serving, I like to start with a nice bed of kale and pasta, then surround with 3 meatballs, and then top it off with more pasta. Some extra virgin olive oil is nice here, and maybe some more lemon. That's how Ashley likes it. Also, if you have it, some freshly grated Parmesan works great as topping here too. And now that we have our finished pasta here, let's dig right in. Cut open this meatball. I do like a breadier meatball. It has a tendency to soak up more flavor. All right, look at that. I got a bite with everything on there: kale, pasta, pine nuts, meatball. Let's take a bite. Instantly getting the kale and the pine nut. Those are really the forward flavors here. The pine nuts are mandatory here. It gives it a depth of flavor that you normally wouldn't get in a quick 1-pot pasta dish like this one. And I will say, this is the leftovers actually from the previous day, and this still holds up. Proves how solid of a weeknight dish this is. If you haven't made any of the dishes from my other videos yet, I think this is the one to start with, because it'll really broaden your horizons as far as for what a weeknight pasta dish can be. And it will give you one more thing to add to your repertoire for a special occasion, a date night, something where you want to have an elevated night of eating. So again, I really hope you end up making this dish. And if you do, make sure to tag me on Instagram @MattyTries. I'd love to see your creation, maybe your own spin. Thank you so much for watching. Just getting to the end of these videos helps YouTube recommend my content to other viewers. If you want to go even further, like this video, add a comment below, maybe something you want to see in a further video. Until next time, I'm gonna go finish my kale pasta. See you then.